We all know the joy of growing tomatoes and peppers in our summer gardens, but I get asked a lot, what can you grow in the spring during the cooler season? And so today I'm going to show you over the last 3 weeks what I've been harvesting out of my container garden here in Zone 6B. It is currently mid-April, and I've been harvesting now since about mid to late March. So I'm going to show you exactly what I'm harvesting out of my small space container garden, and then towards the end I'll also show you what I've been using those vegetables for in my kitchen. If you're in a similar zone to me, during the mid-spring, you're mostly going to be harvesting leafy greens. Now, what's great about leafy greens is there's so many different varieties that you can grow and use for different things. So for example, this container here, this is my mustard spinach. This is actually something new I've been growing this year. I've never tried it before, and I have gotten probably 5 or 6 harvests already out of just this container. So I had a traditional variety of spinach, I have my mustard spinach, and I have arugula, and then my carrots are also growing. And so throughout the late weeks of March and then here into early April, I have been harvesting from this twice a week. I mean, it is just growing so rapidly and so well here in these spring temperatures. And so I've gotten a lot of different meals out of just this one container. Now, there's certain leafy greens that are considered cut and come again. What this means is that you can start harvesting the individual leaves at the beginning of the season rather than having to wait for the entire plant to mature and harvest at the end. So that's how I've been able to harvest from these. And actually, the more that you harvest the leaves off of these types of leafy greens, the more the plant is going to be prompted to keep growing. So I love growing these types of leafy green vegetables. Similar ones that I'm also harvesting here in the last few weeks are kale, which I have several different varieties of, lettuces, and Swiss chard. And like I said, all of these leafy greens are so different from one another. So something like my mustard spinach, which really has more of the feel of a lettuce, a leaf lettuce or a head lettuce, I've been using this in salads a lot. But things like my Tuscan kale or my Swiss chard, which is a little bit tougher, I'm able to use that in different soups and stews. And so growing leafy greens and trying all different varieties, you're going to be able to really maximize the different types of vegetables that you're able to use in the kitchen. Something else that I'm harvesting from my container garden here in the mid-spring on an almost daily basis are my herbs. I love herbs. Now I have a couple containers that are dedicated to herbs, but then I also like putting them throughout my containers as well. I think this helps with pest deterrence. I've read that, those herbs, they have a very strong smell. And so when you are putting them with some of your crops, it's going to help deter some of those pests. I know for sure it helps deter my dog, who does like to sometimes eat leafy greens, out of my containers. And so I have those everywhere, and I'm just constantly harvesting. Herbs are another one similar to those leafy greens, where the more you harvest, the more that they're going to grow. So I harvest these daily and use them in all kinds of dishes. So the herbs that I'm currently growing are thyme. I have several different varieties, including a lemon thyme and then more traditional. I'm growing dill. I have oregano, Italian oregano, and Greek oregano. I have a couple different varieties of mint. I have a lot of parsley, and I have rosemary, I have sage, and chives. So I'm growing a lot of herbs right now. Once the weather warms up, I will add basil, and I also grow several varieties of that each year. Another vegetable I've already harvested is going to be microgreens. Now, this isn't necessarily a harvest, but you can use these microgreens. So I'm currently growing carrots and radish. And when I first seeded them in my containers, I'd seed them a little more closely. And then once they grow and get to a certain point, usually a couple of inches tall, I will then go through and thin them out. Now, those microgreens are absolutely packed with nutrients. If you've ever been to a farmer's market, you'll see that people sell these microgreens and they can be kind of expensive. Well, you can be growing them in your own backyard. And so when I thin out my carrots and my radishes, I then take those microgreens and use them in the kitchen. Now, for me, the easiest way to use these are going to be in salads, or the carrot microgreens I actually use in my morning green smoothies. You really can't taste the carrot, and it just adds those extra micronutrients. So anything where you're also needing to thin it out, you can harvest those as microgreens and find different ways to use them. So those are all the vegetables that I've harvested in mid-spring. What do I have left? So towards later spring, what I will be able to harvest are those ones that grow a little bit slower, or that are the vegetables where you plant it and you have to wait for it to fully mature to be able to harvest it. So here in the next month, I'll be able to start harvesting from my snap peas. Those are slowly growing. I will have endive that I'll be able to harvest the whole head of it. I have a few different cabbages that I'm growing. My carrots I'll be able to harvest. Those take a little longer than most of my other spring vegetables. I'm also growing beets. My radishes should be done here in the next week or two. I'll be able to start harvesting those. I'm also growing celery and then a couple other varieties of Asian greens that aren't quite ready yet. So how am I using my harvest in the kitchen? Well, one is salads. I make a lot of salads with all these beautiful leafy greens. And what I really like doing when I make these salads is mixing up these different types of leafy greens. It really is a nice way to add different textures from the leaf lettuces and the mustard spinach. You know, those are going to be a little lighter than like my kales and my Swiss chard. And so adding in those different textures of leafy greens is really nice in a salad. I also do a lot of green smoothies, so my leafy greens will go in there as well as those microgreens. And then when I harvest my kale and Swiss chard and some of those tougher greens, I love putting those into different soups and stews. I was really excited to be able to harvest my tatsoi already, and I stir-fried that into a salmon and rice dish. And lastly are my herbs. Like I said, I am just putting those in everything, and there's nothing better than being able to just walk out your kitchen, snip a few sprigs of herbs to put in whatever you're making at that moment. So much better than realizing you don't have what you need, needing to go to the store, and then you're spending a lot of time having to run around. When you have herbs in your garden, that is the easiest way to up the quality of a meal. Adding those fresh herbs is truly one of my favorite parts of gardening. If I had an even smaller space and could only grow one thing, it would definitely be herbs. They're just so versatile. So highly recommend growing those herbs. I'm excited to get my basil going once it starts warming up a little bit. That's everything I've been harvesting in the mid-spring here in Zone 6B. If you're a gardener who really has just grown tomatoes and peppers and gets excited for those warm season vegetables, which are great, don't get me wrong, if you have not tried growing in the spring, you really are missing out on so many different vegetables that you could be adding to your kitchen meals. And for me, these containers, I'm going to be able to harvest all of this around the end of May and then plant in those warm season vegetables once I amend my soil and get it ready for the summer growing season. So it's not like you're taking up space in your containers by growing these spring vegetables where you could instead be growing tomatoes and peppers, because those have to wait anyway for the summer. And so if you have not taken advantage of the spring season to grow vegetables in your garden, give it a try. I highly recommend it.